Sous vide was supposed to take over the world, and yet it didn't.
Sous vide, seemingly magical cooking technique of high-end chefs from the future.
Anybody heard about sous vide before? And really with this technique, it allows us to control temperature and of course cooking time very precisely.
I think the future of sous vide cooking is awesome.
Sous vide has become a home kitchen essential over the past few years.
Back in 2011, Heston Blumenthal said in his book, Heston Blumenthal at Home, that it was going to become as commonplace as frying, baking and grilling. Here we are 13 years later and that hasn't happened. Sous vide, with its ability to keep food at a certain temperature for a certain length of time with a wide margin of error to avoid overcooking, the ability to cook lots of food at the same time, the ability to prepare food in advance, cooking at low temperatures, which therefore means low energy consumption, so therefore cheaper to cook. But it hasn't happened. So why hasn't sous vide taken over the world? Let's have a look. First of all, what is sous vide? For the uninitiated, sous vide, which translated from the French means under vacuum, is not a new technology. It was around in the 70s in restaurant settings and simply means to have a bath of water but set at low temperatures, often in the sort of 60 centigrade to 80 centigrade range, somewhere around that, depending on what you're trying to achieve. You have to vacuum seal your food, that is to put your food into a bag and suck all the air out of it so that it's vacuum tight. Water is an incredible conductor of heat and air isn't. I always love this test that Heston did to show you.
You're going to think that that's not even hot enough to give your hand a suntan, let alone cook a chicken.
You wouldn't put your hand into 180 degrees C water. I mean, it will start boiling at that point. But you take my point. Water is extremely good at keeping and conducting heat. Air, not so much. This is where sous vide works because you are surrounding your foodstuff in a bag in a sealed environment, so it's not boiling in there, it's ticking up to that temperature. So, typically speaking, you set your temperature, press go, pop your food in, and off you go. Take a steak, for example. Season up your meat to your desired cut, set it to maybe 55, 60 degrees, and then leave it to cook for an hour, maybe two, and if you went over by 30 minutes, an hour. It wouldn't make a huge difference, it wouldn't start to degrade. So therefore you've got a huge margin of error if you know you're going to be cooking later, but you've got some sort of wiggle room in there. Simply remove from the bag, pat dry, and fry to get a nice crust on the outside. Because at those temperatures, one thing you're not going to get is a crust, is a lovely browning finish. And that's where you need to finish it, in a pan. So there's lots of opportunities where I think sous vide is one of the best ways to cook something. Large, chunky pieces of meat that require slow cooking. Really great on the sous vide. And yet at the other end of the spectrum, when you've got foods that need a very precise amount of cooking, like a steak, work really great in sous vide. And then you've got things like scrambled eggs, which I made not that long ago on this very channel. There's all kinds of ways sous vide can make life a little bit easier for the domestic cook, and yet it's a real novelty geeks item. This is my Sous Vide Supreme water oven, as it's marketed, or water bath if you preferred. I had to double check my records, and I actually got this 10 years ago this week. So it's fair to say I've given it a thorough run around the block and tried it out in all different recipes and methods. I really enjoy using it, and I've used it in a whole bunch of recipes on this very channel and over on my blog. Hey, it's that one there. I should point out, for clarity, that I was sent this by the PR company who worked with this company at the time. So I didn't pay for this, and they sent me the vacuum bagger to go with it. So, you know, factor that into what I'm saying. After 10 years, I'm not feeling quite so indebted to the company as perhaps I might have done. So I've road tested this for 10 years. I've had it for 10 years, but it was a freebie. So let's just get that out of the way. I haven't communicated with them since, although I did actually send them an email asking about the latest model of this, but they never got back to me. The latest model of this on the website looks really similar dimensions, similar properties, just has a clear lid. It might have other features in there, but I couldn't work out anything from there. Features I really like about this, you know, obviously it's got this digital display here that's not touchscreen, I should point out. There's proper buttons under there. It's completely silent. There's no noise coming from it at all, so you could leave it somewhere quite happily. It's got offset handles either side, so you can pick it up and tip it into the sink quite safely. It has a rack inside. One of the things that can be problematic with cooking sous vide is keeping your food submerged. Trying to hold it there in place can be difficult. The rack in there helps you keep steaks, vegetables, whatever it is, held in place. Things I don't particularly like. There's the size. It's not unique to this model, so you've got to then put this box somewhere. It's got to live somewhere, right? Either on your counter. Now, I'm fortunate enough, I have a garage, so I stick it out there. I can set it, pop the meat in, come back to it in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is. So it's not a problem. But if you're limited on counter space, and it doesn't really emit a lot of heat. It'll be warm to the touch, but it won't be like radiating. And it has these neat rubberized handles, so I'm not touching the metal directly, so I can lift it up with ease. And we can't look past the cost. This is essentially an insulated box. Prices vary, but it's somewhere between £300 and £400 just for this. Again, I didn't pay for this. I was lucky enough to get sent one, but you've got that in there, combined with the fact that you also need a vacuum sealing device. I got sent the initial Sous Vide Supreme one, which sadly snapped a couple of years back. I've since replaced it with one from Temu, which you might have seen me review, which is doing okay for the less than 10 quid I paid for it. So you need yet another bit of kit before you even get going. And this is probably the main obstacle. You've got to get the oven, cooking apparatus itself, and you need to get another vacuum sealing. You could argue you can use your vacuum sealing and other things just for preserving, or for example, I know one of my commenters said that they batch chop a load of onions and then vacuum seal them and pop them in the freezer, which I think is a genius idea, by the way. On one bored Sunday afternoon, you can chop a whole bag of onions and then have frozen onions ready to go in your freezer whenever you need them. Great tip. This is not the only method to cook sous vide. Very popular are the circulation or immersion wands, a long tall device that you submerged into a tank, and that's got an inbuilt sort of fan circulator as well as a thermostat so that it keeps regulating the temperature of the water that you're in. And these are much more affordable, sort of in the 50, 70, 150 pound range, something like that. Again, you still need to vacuum seal something, but then you'll also need a suitable container to put it in. You're going to want something that's not going to leach away in the water. You're also going to want something that's food safe. So there's a lot of factors to consider there, but there's whole articles you can read up about that. There was a device some years ago called Codlo. I think it went through a name change, which I did try out for a while, that enables you to plug into an existing heating device like a rice cooker or slow cooker. Essentially, it's a giant thermostat plug, turning the temperature on and off. A little bit hacky, a little bit home-baked, but actually worked really well. Let me say it, worked just as well as any other sous vide method. And that was a great halfway house. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like they're trading anymore, which is a real shame because I think there's mileage in that device. Because the biggest obstacle we're talking about here is cost. I just outlaid the price for this machine, which, while doing the job, is equivalent to the price of a regular oven that you would fit into the wall, right? Or a freestanding oven. It's a real obstacle. Consider air frying, which, while it's been around well over a decade, in the past couple of years with the energy crisis and the cost of living crisis, means that people turn to air frying very quickly as a cheaper way of baking foods, because you just plug and play. You plug it in and off you go. And if you look at many supermarket products now, a lot of them will have air fryer instructions on. I don't think you can look at many products now and read the back of the packet and it doesn't say, oh, for oven baking, for grilling, for sous vide. I've certainly never seen one. They just can't permeate at this price point. You also, apart from specialty TV programs and specialty blogs, you really don't see sous vide being used in the wild of TV programs. It's not like Mary Berry suddenly says, and I really recommend doing this sous vide. It's just not in that wheelhouse, is it? Even a more modern chef, they tend not to do sous vide methods at home because they know it's out of reach for a lot of people and is still regarded as a bit of an oddball hobby. And then another thing, you've then got to cook the food again, searing it to give it that colour if it's something like a steak or similar, whether you're blow torching it or frying it or grilling it at a very high heat. I think some would argue as well that while sous vide is enormously convenient and very consistent, you know, you put same meat in for the same length of time, it's going to come out the same, you know, whereas the thickness of meat in a pan sometimes can be difficult to get everything exactly right. Sous vide shouldn't give you that problem. But is there a chance as well that we're just moving away from cooking by using this device? The enjoyment of standing over the hob and popping meat in the pan, feeling it sizzle, giving an experimental prod, turning it over, you know, all these kind of tactile things associated with cooking. It's a bit more of an abstract one, I know, but sous vide does take you away from that. While it does provide convenience, when I said you could leave it by itself just to tick away, how is that any different from slow cooking, which is enormously more affordable? You know, slow cookers are in the 10 to 20 pounds mark for the basic models. I'm sure you can get fancy models that cost much more. But the starting base, a lot of people have a slow cooker because it uses about as much energy as a light bulb, and you can stick it on for 8 hours or so, start it before you go to work or start it later in the day, and it's ready for you. And again, putting it an hour late doesn't make a great deal of difference. So the negatives of sous vide are the enormous barrier to entry. The sous vide setup, whether that's through an oven like this, whether it's through an immersion circulator wand type setup or other device, and multiple pieces of apparatus you need to get. And whilst one of the advantages is that sous vide can always produce very, very tender meat, is that necessarily what you want? And I mean that sincerely. You know, sometimes you want a bit of chew, you want something to bite hold of. One thing with sous vide is you will always get that quite voluptuous texture. Salmon, for example, will always come out in that very yielding to the teeth type mode. Sometimes you want a bit of fire and a bit of variety in texture, which you absolutely will not get with sous vide. The advantages are, of course, it's very consistent. Everything comes out the same every time. And you can leave it alone for long periods of time. It's really not a problem. It can absolutely transform some really tough, fatty, connective pieces of meat. The sous vide subreddit is obsessed with something they call the Sir Charles, a chuck roast. Usually you would pot roast it for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 hours, or you would pop it into a casserole to break down naturally over time. And that's all good, but obviously the juices, the flavors, leach into whatever you're cooking and evaporate away. In sous vide, because of the vacuum nature, that doesn't happen. Pop it into sous vide for about 24 hours, and what was your cheap, gristly casserole beef comes out like a beautiful roast tenderloin. So it transforms more troublesome cuts of meat. So sous vide is probably here to stay. It's probably hit the level it's going to. I don't think it's going to get any bigger than this. It's fashionable amongst trendy food types, people who like following the latest trends in food and cooking. But I think the barrier to entry and the overall weirdness of it is just not enough to convince people to change to a different method of cooking. Pop down into the comments and let me know what you think. Is sous vide's day still to come? Are we still waiting for the revolution? Or is this a flash in the lukewarm pan?